Hey everyone, this is Dr. Blakeney and I am in Pennsylvania at Valley Forge. You might notice where I was yesterday. I was in Philadelphia, but today I'm about 20 miles to the west, and in 1777, George Washington brought his troops here, and they basically needed a place to stay for the winter to kind of regroup. The army was pretty much in shambles at that point. They weren't very disciplined. They hadn't done very well in the war yet, and nobody knew what was really going to happen. So they came here to kind of regroup, and they did a marvelous job. They came to this area, which you can kind of see, kind of looks like this. It's pretty open. Before this was all forest, and they basically tore the forest down, and they created a camp like this. This camp became about 12,000 people. And that included some women and children that followed their spouses to the war. So this became the fourth largest city in the colonies at the time. 12,000 huts like this, and they kind of regrouped. Part of the way they regrouped was Baron von Steuben came over. He was from Prussia, which is no longer a country, but it was back in the 1700s. It is currently mostly Poland, but parts of Germany as well, maybe a couple of other little countries in that region today. But von Steuben came over and he disciplined the troops. In fact, today, the military uses something called the Blue Book. It's a training manual, and parts that still come from what von Steuben did back in the 1700s. In addition, a lot of people died here. In fact, I just read more people died here over the winter of 1777, 1778 than in any individual battle. Other things, kind of connecting it to COVID and what's happened recently. Smallpox was endemic around here. It was going around, as well as dysentery, flu, pneumonia. And one of the things General Washington at the time wanted to do was he wanted to inoculate the troops. So what he did was he did one of the first mass inoculations of people by giving them smallpox. I'm going to show you a couple other places here, but right now I just want to finish by going in here and seeing what a typical quarters might have looked like for a group of soldiers during the American Revolution. I hope you could see that okay. I'm going to take you to a couple other places. We're going to go to a redoubt, and then we're going to go see General Washington's headquarters in just a minute. So why don't you join me, and I'll see you there in just a second. All right, so I'm just a few feet away from where I was before. If you see those trees, and you can see probably the cabins in the background, this is a redoubt, and a redoubt was a place where they would have their artillery. So you can kind of see the artillery over here, and you can also see the strategic importance of this location. It was on top of a hill, so it gave them a good advantage to not only see where the British were coming, but also to attack. Generally, during this time, it was better to be above rather than below who you were fighting. What do you think they might have kept in there? Any guesses? All right, so this is probably where they put the gunpowder and stuff like that. And by the way, I didn't mention this before, or I might have, but I want to do it one more time. The city of Philadelphia at the time was the largest city in the United States, or sorry, the colonies at the time. 30,000 people. It was the largest city, and it was only about 20 minutes away over to the east. To the west, we had the towns of York and Reading, and this is where the Pennsylvania state government and the colonial government had to go. They were in Philadelphia, but then when the British took it over, they moved a little bit west, about 30 or 40 miles, and so this was a good place to hang out for the winter because Washington could keep an eye on what their British were doing and protect the government. Let's move on to the next site. All right, so now we've made it to General Washington's military headquarters while he stayed in Valley Forge from the winter of 1777 until June 19th, 1778, the day after the British gave up Philadelphia to retreat back towards New York, the troops from here, all 12,000 of them, went to Philadelphia. But this is where George Washington stayed, along with up to 25 people, including people from his household. And as you can see, it's not a super big house for 25 people, but that's how many people stayed there. In addition to that, a couple of things I found that you're probably not going to find in textbooks. Washington did not get paid. They paid his expenses. For example, if he ate food, if he paid for food, they'd pay for that, but he didn't take a salary for all his stuff that he did during the war. And this house was owned by a guy named Isaac Potts. This is Valley Forge. So there's an ironworks here, and they had a forge, and it was rented by Washington and the Army for 100 pounds, which was about what the going rate was for a house like this. It was a relatively new house, so modern design, back in 1777. So this is the house that George Washington stayed in for about 6 months. It's probably about 2 miles from the first stop that we had where all the troops were. And it's right next to 2 rivers that meet where a lot of supplies came in once they got their act together and could supply the troops during the winter. All right, so Washington lived in the house behind us. That was Mr. Potts' house. And over there, I think, are the stables. You can probably see them over there. And so he had a group of people that protected him, and they were called the lifeguards, which I'd never thought of, but they protect his life, so they're called the lifeguards. And Washington said that they had to be born in the colonies to protect Washington and his Continental Army. So here's where they stayed, in these little huts here. And you can see they're not very far from where Washington was, but they protected Washington, his family, the papers, everything that was important that was kept down in the house. So anyways, that's just a little piece of history that maybe you wouldn't have known had you not watched this video. I hope to provide you with a ton of those soon. Take care. Bye-bye.